This is section 3.5, Slope-Intercept Form. So you can take an equation of a line and write it in several different forms, the most useful of which is the slope-intercept form. This is the form right here, y equals mx plus b. It's very useful because it gives us a lot of information about the line, and it's also very easy to graph from that form. It gives us the slope and the y-intercept. The slope is always the number with x, so here m is the slope, and your y-intercept is b, the number without x. And the slope of the line, remember, is how the line is leaning, and the y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. And that's basically a slope and a point. And if you have a slope and a point, you know everything you need to know about a line. You can graph it, and you can write the equation. One thing to notice here is the equation has y by itself. So the last good thing about this form is you can take any equation in any form and write it in slope-intercept form simply by solving for y. So you can put any equation into slope-intercept form by getting y by itself. Don't forget, slope is always the number with x, and b is always the number without x. Sometimes they try to trick you and they write these in opposite orders, right? It doesn't matter, it's the same thing. So slope is the number with x, y-intercept is the number without. Here they want us to write the slope-intercept form of a line with a slope of 3/5 and a y-intercept of 4. This is really easy because slope-intercept form requires a slope and a y-intercept, and they just gave us a slope and a y-intercept. So we're basically just going to plug these into the right spots. So I have the form here. It's going to be y equals, our slope is 3/5, so it'll be 3/5 for m times x, and our b is 4, so plus 4. Right, so just given those two pieces of information, automatically we have the equation of the line. This equation here represents the line that satisfies those conditions. If we want to graph it, we can graph it pretty easily by plotting a couple points here. B is your y-intercept, so since b is 4, that tells us we're going to cross the y-axis up here at 4. And then since our slope is 3/5, remember slope is rise over run, that means we're going to go up 3 and right 5 from this point. So from this point we'll go up 1, 2, 3, and right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right about up here, so 5, 7. Right, and so now our line will go through these points. Something like that. Right, so just given those two pieces of quick information, right, the slope and the y-intercept, we can come up with the equation of the line and we can graph it very easily. Given the graph of a line, we should be able to come up with the equation of the line in slope-intercept form. All we have to do is identify the slope and the y-intercept from the graph. Finding the y-intercept is really easy. That's the point where our graph crosses the y-axis. Here our y-intercept would be 3, so that means our b in the equation will be 3. So plus 3. For the slope, we just need to find 2 points and count rise over run to go from one point to another. So we can use that y-intercept of 3 and maybe the point here, and we're going to figure out how far up and how far over to go from one point to another. Starting at the bottom, we'd have to go up 2, so a rise of 2, and left 1. That means it's a rise of negative 1. So up 2, left 1, which is a negative 1, x. Remember, rise, up is positive, down is negative. For run, right is positive, left is negative. And obviously we can simplify this to y equals negative 2x plus 3. Right, so just given the graph, now we can come up with the equation of the line. We've looked at a couple different ways to graph equations already. This is probably the most efficient way, and that's going to be taking the equation, putting it into slope-intercept form, and then using the slope and the y-intercept to graph it. So the very first step is to take the equation and put it into slope-intercept form. That means solving the equation for y. Here I have the steps here, the basic algebra steps to get y by itself. You need to first move the 3x over, so I added it to both sides. Then you need to get y by itself by dividing by 2, so you divide everything by 2. It's important in this step that you divide these pieces by 2 separately. You don't want to make one big fraction bar over 2. That's because we want this piece to be the mx, so we want to be able to see our slope. And we want this piece to be the b, so we can see our y-intercept. We want these two pieces to be separate, basically. So I just took this equation, solved it for y, and I got y equals 3 over 2x plus 6. Now this is in slope-intercept form, so I know our slope is 3 over 2, and our y-intercept is 6. Using that information to graph, we'll start by plotting our y-intercept. Remember, the y-intercept is where your graph crosses the y-axis, and this is saying it crosses at 6. right about there. And then our slope is 3 over 2. Remember, slope is rise over run, so the number on top is rise, that means we're going to go up 3. The number on bottom is 2, that means we're going to go right 2. So from this point, we're going to go up 1, 2, 3, and right 1, 2. It's going to put us a little bit up there in space, but obviously you can see how it will keep going. So let's see, up 1, 2, 3, right 2, somewhere about there. And then we'll just draw our line through it. And this will be your primary method of graphing from here on out. It's a little bit more efficient than the other methods. And also, it's very useful to have your equation already in slope-intercept form so that you can also identify the slope and the y-intercept very quickly. There is a relationship between the slopes of lines that are parallel and the slopes of lines that are perpendicular. Parallel lines have the same slope. Perpendicular lines have what we call opposite reciprocal slopes. Really quickly, I want to go through what opposite reciprocal means. Opposite means change the sign. Reciprocal means flip the fraction. So I have 4 numbers here, and I'm going to show you really quickly how to find the opposite reciprocal of each. So 3/4, what's the opposite reciprocal? Change the sign, so since it's positive, we'll have to make it negative, and flip the fraction, 4 over 3. Those are opposite reciprocals. What about negative 1/2? We'll change the sign, now it becomes positive, and flip the fraction, 2 over 1. That's the same thing as 2. So negative 1/2 and 2 are opposite reciprocals. What about 5? Well, first of all, make it a fraction, 5 over 1. Now we'll change the sign, so it'll be negative. We'll flip the fraction, 1/5. Those are opposite reciprocals. Last one here, negative 2. We're going to put it over 1, and we're going to change the sign, so it'll be positive, and we're going to flip the fraction, it'll be 1/2. So that's a quick rundown of how to find the opposite reciprocal, and again, you're only going to use that when you know that you're perpendicular to some other line, and you need to come up with the slope that your line should have. Here we need to find the slope-intercept form of a line that fits a couple characteristics. The big picture is if you want the slope-intercept form of a line, you need to find the slope and the y-intercept. So we're just going to use the information that they give us to try to come up with those things. The first thing they tell us is that our line is perpendicular to this line. We know that perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes, so we need to figure out the slope of this line and then find the opposite reciprocal, and that will be the slope of our line. How do you find the slope of this line? Well, you can put it into y equals mx plus b and just read off the slope. And we can put any equation y equals mx plus b by solving for y. So here are the steps for solving for y. First, we want to subtract 2x from both sides. Then you want to get y by itself by dividing everything by negative 5. Make sure you do these separately. And then simplify. This is now this equation in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. So we know our m automatically is 2/5. We actually don't care about the b of this line, right? Because we only needed the slope because we knew our lines are perpendicular. So we can ignore this piece. So this line has slope 2/5. Our line is perpendicular to it, so we need the opposite reciprocal of 2/5. Opposite reciprocal means change the sign, so it'll be negative, and flip the fraction, so it'll be 5 over 2. So we just figured out the slope of our line, which is perpendicular to the one that they gave us. Last thing is we need the y-intercept, but they actually give that to us. They tell us the y-intercept is 4, so that means b equals 4. So now we have everything we need for our equation, y equals mx plus b, right, because they wanted slope-intercept form. So it'll be y equals negative 5 over 2x plus 4. This is the line that meets the characteristics that they were talking about.